What's up, Jackalopes? I'm Hope, and today I'm going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I didn't do this tag last year because when June came around I didn't really feel like I'd read enough to have much to say, but I've really picked up my reading in the last half of 2020, and I've done some reading at the beginning half of this year, so I do feel like I have more to say here at the midpoint of 2021 than I did last year. So I am excited to jump into this tag. I'm hoping that this will be kind of a fun retrospective on what I've read so far, and also give me a little nudge forward to keep reading more, especially because I've been in a bit of a slump the last couple of months. But the first question is, what's the best book you've read so far in 2021? And for me, this is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. It's about a young woman named Cassiopeia who is feeling very stuck in her life. She and her mother live with her mother's family, but they're kind of treated very poorly. They're treated like servants, and she especially gets pushed around by her older cousin Martine and her grandfather. And she's just feeling very stuck, but then one day she opens this chest in her grandfather's room and accidentally releases a Mayan death god, and ends up going on a big adventure with him to help him reattain his full godhood so that he can break the curse that's binding them together. I think this is a really fun story, and it has a very fairy tale-esque kind of writing style. It feels like somebody's like sitting down and telling you a story, and I really enjoyed that, and I think it worked really well for this. I also absolutely loved the dynamics between the characters, because all of the characters were really nuanced and interesting, and Cassiopeia is very cool, I think, because she very much her strength is her compassion and her kindness and the way that she treats other people. That's frequently what gets her both into and out of trouble in the story, and I just really enjoyed that about her. And Hunkame, the death god that she's traveling with, is a really interesting character, particularly the way that he develops over the story. So I absolutely loved this. It is hands down the best book I've read in 2021 so far. It was also the first book I read. It's also the only book I've given 5 stars. So yeah, I started off the year on a high note. The second question is, what's the best sequel you've read in 2021? And I've only, if I can reach it, read one sequel. It was A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. This is like the 3.5 entry in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and I can't say much about it without spoiling the series. It's basically like a check-in with the characters to see where they're at and how their relationships have changed as a result of the events of the 3rd book. So I really liked this. I'm a very character-driven reader, so I like stuff like this, but I don't think this is a book that's going to appeal to everyone, and I thought it was fine, but like, it's probably not a book I'd go out of my way to recommend. Just set that over there for now. The next question is a new release you haven't read yet but want to, and I've got A Desolation Called Peace by Katie Martine. This is the follow-up to a memory called Empire, which follows a young woman named Mahit who becomes the ambassador for her small mining station to this empire called Teixcalan, and upon arriving in the Teixcalan Lake capital, finds out that her predecessor has been murdered, and she doesn't know why, and no one will talk about it. So she has to investigate his murder, find out what happened to him, try not to get murdered herself, and also try to represent her mining station's interests. So that's the first book. This one follows up about a year later. I believe it continues Mahit's story while also pulling in some new POV characters, which will be interesting because the world here is really interesting, so I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like through the different perspectives of some other characters. I also just absolutely love Katie Martine's writing style. It's very, I would say it's very poetic, but it's not dense or overly flowery. So I think it flows really well. I really enjoyed reading the first book. I read it in like 24 hours during a readathon. So I'm really excited to dive into this one. I just haven't had a time to dive into it, and I've not really been in a sci-fi mood as much. So yeah, that's the one I would like to read that's come out already. Another question is, what's your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? For me, this is The Witness for the Dead by Catherine Addison. It actually comes out next week, so it's kind of only just barely in the second half of the year. It's really at the end of June, but this is the follow-up to The Goblin Emperor, and that one follows Maya as he is this young half-goblin, and he unexpectedly becomes emperor and has to learn how to be a good leader while also trying to find out more about the events that resulted in his becoming emperor. and I really love that book. It's one of my all-time favorites, so I'm very excited to get the sequel, although the sequel actually follows a different character, which I'm very excited about because it's a side character from the first book who I absolutely loved. So I'm kind of similarly to A Desolation Called Peace, I'm looking forward to seeing more of the world from a different character's perspective. Next up was, what was your biggest disappointment this year? And this was hard for me because I've actually really liked everything I've read this year, but I decided to go with In the Shadow of the Axe by Nicholas Kaufman. This is just barely a disappointment for me, and it's only because Nicholas Kaufman is one of my favorite authors, so I have very high expectations at this point anytime I go into another one of his works, and this one I just didn't think was as strong as the other books that I've read from him. But this one is following a young man in the 1840s who returns to his small hometown, his village that he's from, after being kicked out of university, and he's not been back since he was like 13. His father sent him away to boarding school, but upon his return he finds out that his father has died, and so the book is following him as he kind of contends with the complex emotions he has about this, because his father was a town hero, everybody in the town loves him, or loved him, and the protagonist, I think his name is Kosh, I'm not certain I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he had a very strained relationship with his father because his father sent him away to boarding school at a young age, and he never really heard from him, and nobody even told him that his father had died. So he's kind of contending with these emotions and the feelings that he has about this situation, and also some very strange things start to happen as soon as he returns to the village. And so there's also this mystery that's occurring that kind of ties the history of the village to Kosh. And yeah, it's really good. It's only a disappointment because I rated it like 3.5 stars as opposed to my usual 4 to 5 stars for this author. But I would still really recommend this one if you like kind of slow creeping horror. The reason that this didn't work as well for me is the first half is very slow. It's very focused on developing some of the side characters who are important to the story, but it means the first half kind of drags, and then the latter half is very action-packed, but it just feels a little rushed. There is also a very good short story in the back of this book that I loved, so, like, again, it's barely a disappointment. It's only by technicality. The next question is your biggest surprise, and this for me was Shadows Over Hemlock, or Shadow Over Hemlock? I think it's Shadow Over Hemlock by E.A. Coben. This was a random ebook that I had on my Kindle. I don't even remember when I bought it, or like if it was a Prime first read or what. I don't know when I acquired it or why, but I really enjoyed it. It's this very strange story about this rogue exorcist who, like, 10 years ago his best friend went missing or is presumed dead or something, and he believes that his friend is out there somewhere and he wants to find him, but he's kind of 10 years down the road become very depressed and he doesn't think he's ever going to find out what happened, until he hears one day from this guy from his past from that 10 years ago who's like, there's this girl who's possessed, or believed to be possessed, and she also claims to have been to hell and back. And I think she might be able to help you. She might have information that could help you find your friend or find out what happened. And so he takes on this case to go help this woman who's like the daughter of a wealthy senator. And he goes to help her, try to exorcise her, while also trying to get more information about what happened to her so that he can see if that helps him find his friend. And the whole book, like, the premise sounds very like, okay, we're solving a mystery and everything, but the whole book is like batshit insane because it just keeps getting weirder. Every time I kind of got a sense of like, okay, this is going this way, it would just go, well, actually, there's also this. And it was just a wild ride of a book, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was very strange, and it just kept me engaged through the whole thing. I think I read it in like 2 days or something. It didn't take me very long. So not knowing where or when I acquired this book, I had like no expectations going in because I never read anything from this author, but I really enjoyed it, and I absolutely will be picking up the later books in the series when I get a chance. The next question is a favorite new author, either a debut author or a new to you author, and I haven't read any debuts yet this year, so instead I have this book. I actually read it for a class, but this is Migritude by Shailja Patel. This is a poetry book, and it's really actually the script for a stage performance that she created several years ago, and this is a really, really interesting book. And I say that she's a new favorite author, because if she ever did another version of the stage performance, I would absolutely like try to go see it or watch it somewhere. I would also read anything else that she put out. Her poetry is really, really good. I'm usually terrified of poetry. I struggle to understand it, but her poetry is extremely accessible, and she does this very cool thing in this book and in this stage performance. I assume, obviously I didn't get to see it, it was several years ago, but she's combining like her personal history and her family history with larger themes across history in Africa, particularly Kenya, in India, in the UK, and in America. So she's pulling from like anecdotes from her past and from her family's past and combining them with like documents that have been unearthed at various points. And it's all about like the experience of being a migrant, and about imperialism and colonialism and the impacts that those have on places, particularly colonialism. It very much is looking at like the impacts of Britain colonizing various regions. So it's really interesting. I think that it delves into some really important topics, some very difficult topics as well. This book does talk about various forms of abuse and rape and some very heavy things, but I feel like she does it so carefully and thoughtfully that it's just a really interesting conversation on these topics, and I highly recommend this. I don't normally recommend poetry, but I thought that this was fantastic. I also got the opportunity to attend a talk that she gave at the university that I work for and attend, and I also got to go to a Q&A that she did afterwards. I say go, it was virtual, it was on Zoom, but like it was just a really cool opportunity and really gave more context for this, but like even without that context, this is fantastic. If I can get it back on the shelf, maybe later. Okay, it's just gonna sit there poking out for now. Newest fictional crush. I don't have one. Newest favorite character. Cassiopeia from Gods of Jade and Shadow. She's fabulous. I love her, and again, I really like the way that a lot of her strength comes from the fact that she is kind-hearted and just like treats other people with respect. I love that about her. She's really interesting. A book that made you cry. I also don't have an answer for this one. So far, no books this year have made me cry. A book that made you happy. For this, I have grabbed the right one. Several novellas over there, but for this I have Fireheart Tiger by Elliot de Woodard. This was absolutely fantastic. It's very short. I read it in one evening, and it's really weird to me on one hand to say that this makes me happy, because this book also deals with some very heavy topics. It looks a lot at like interpersonal abuse, like abusive relationships. It also looks at like the abuse inflicted by imperialist governments, and it's really just like it's in some ways it's difficult because it does talk about these very heavy topics, but it does so with this like overall optimistic tone for these characters. I think you leave this book with this sense that the protagonist Han has grown significantly, and that she is kind of becoming more confident. She's able to stand up for herself in situations where she is being mistreated, and it seems like this attitude may bleed over into the ways that she, thinks about the relationship of her home country to Afteria, which is this imperialist nation that is trying to kind of come in and slowly, insidiously work its way into her home. And I feel like at the end of this you have this sense that there's real strength and just like, I don't know how to describe it. It feels like there's hope at the end of this book, and that is what about this book made me really happy. I just think the tone overall is a happy one in the end. Not necessarily throughout the book, but definitely in the end. I don't know what would put that there. I'm gonna need access to those. Because the next question is, what's the most beautiful book you've bought or received this year? And I kind of have two. Well, no, I'm gonna go with one because I really like this one, and also the other one would be spoiling a subscription box that I think just recently shipped out. I got mine, but I don't know that everybody has theirs. But I'm gonna pull this one, which is my Spanish edition of The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. I mentioned this earlier. This is the book about Maya. I love this cover. I think the illustration is gorgeous, and I think it does a really good job of representing this book. But I have this because I am about to start a master's program in English, and I will need to do a reading exam if I get into my preferred program, and so I wanted an opportunity to kind of work on my reading ability in Spanish for the foreign language requirement. Next up, penultimate question: what books do you need to read by the end of the year? All of the anticipated releases mentioned above, those two, I need to read by the end of the year. I also am making a point of trying to read all of the books that I bought this year. I have an upcoming project with those. And lastly, I have a few books that I really want to get to so I can read the sequels of these. I'm particularly excited to get to These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong, which is 1920s Shanghai Romeo and Juliet retelling with monsters. And there's so much about that that has me intrigued, and the sequel comes out I think at the end of the year. So I'd like to get to this one before that comes out. And then the very last question is, who's your favorite book community member? And I hate picking favorites, but I do want to shout out real quick Cece from Cece's Reading Journey. I did a buddy read with her. I did buddy read roulette during the Valentine's readathon in February, and I'd never done a buddy read before, and Cece is just so nice. She's the first other like bookish content creator I've really gotten to interact with, and she just made me feel so welcome. She was so nice. She gave me some really good advice. I've gotten to talk to her a couple of times, and her content is great. She did a really cool tag video recently, an original tag based on Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so you should definitely go check her channel out. Definitely check that tag out because it was very cool. And yeah, I just want to give her a shout out because she's wonderful. And that is all of the questions and all I have for you today. My battery is flashing at me, so I better wrap this up. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I enjoyed making it. I did enjoy looking back on my reading, and I do feel energized to read some more in this latter half of the year and reach my Goodreads goal, which is 50 books, and I'm behind, but I'm hopeful. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to connect with me on social media, my Twitter and Goodreads will be linked below, and I hope if you enjoyed this video you might consider giving it a like or even subscribing and sticking around to see what comes next. But regardless, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.